Welcome to Unexpected Points. Kevin Cole here, Josh Hermsmeyer here. Week 5, we put that one in the books. Another good week for the NFL. Scoring's back. It's all been solved. It's all been cured. Lateral passes will show us the way forward. Some news. We got some newsy stuff to talk about up top. First, we got to check in on whatever hat that Josh is wearing. So we have a Broncos hat here. Is this a John Elway still? John Elway love, a Sean Payton shout out, a Bo Nix believer. Are you into the Broncos defense, which I believe I have ranked as the second best defense in the NFL so far this year? Give it to me.
Yeah, I'm going to Denver this weekend. So gonna hit up Urban Farmer, have some bison steak, and I'm going to go to the game and probably a strip club or two, and it's going to be fantastic. So I'm wearing my Broncos hat.
You're going to go do some nice cannabis shops while you're there. Get some, I don't know what
Shotgun Willie's actually has one adjacent to their club. So yeah, probably drop in there too. So it's going to be a fantastic weekend. Do this every year with my buddy who's a big Broncos fan. And he's actually the one who knows the higher ups at Denver, gets me on the field and stuff like that. So always something I look forward
to. You know what? I Chargers. Oh, wow. You're gonna be torn loyalties for you here. You want to hear a pretty boomer? I don't know if this is a boomer take or not. I think it's just a correct take. So maybe, but the youngins, the youths, they live in a different world than I do. So not even that long ago, but living in New York City, basically through 2019, because 2020 pandemic, all that stuff, went down. So there wasn't that much going on there. But even a little bit prior to that, whenever I made trips out to San Francisco again, and then now going back to New York City, when I've been back to New York City, walking around in Washington, D.C., basically any somewhat concentrated urban area in the United States, it just smells like weed everywhere. Everywhere you walk, it smells like all the time. And, I'm not here for it. Like if you want to partake.
It does not smell like weed up here in Idaho. It's just fresh.
It smells like potato. Whatever potato smells like. But it just
is the gem state. I'll have you know, the gem state.
Okay. I'm just saying it's you want to do your thing, I'm almost going to go full boomer and just say we need to get Chief Police Bratton and Giuliani back out here, stop and frisking some people and just getting this marijuana out, not out in the open. Do it at home. Go out, enjoy yourself. Go back home. I don't need to smell it everywhere. I mean, listen, I wouldn't want to, like back in the olden days, it was cigarette smoke everywhere. I wouldn't want to smell that either. But I think like the weed smells even more pungent. So that's my number one take. Let's no more open smoking, no more people smelling like it everywhere. Can I walk down the street and not have to have like a secondhand high at every?
Wait, are you saying you also can't smoke or vape tobacco products? Like, is this
no, that's fine. It doesn't smell as much. It doesn't smell as much, quite honestly. Like, I feel like if someone's smoking a joint, you could smell it like 4 blocks away.
If we could engineer the cannabis to be a little less pungent, you'd be fine.
Yes. Yes, that would be okay.
Stone people everywhere, not a problem for you. You just don't like the smell.
Yeah, I just don't want to have to smell it everywhere. Like I'm walking around, it's just wafting. The waft is just all over the place. So that's one of my boomer takes. Sorry, I know you youngins out there, you think like, you got like 2 joints in each hand and we're walking around town and that's just the way the life would be. But, back in my day, when we would partake in such things, little element of danger, that we would have. And I think that's healthy. We need to get that back into the system. We can't just be walking around everywhere, not having to worry about the long arm of the law. Let's bring that element back to us. What do you think about that? Get those testosterone levels up, when you have to deal with some danger every now and again.
So you get dopamine hits from doing dangerous things. That's what I've learned today.
It's called being a red-blooded American male. Okay. Back off. Sorry. Take my boomer cap off. Let's go back to put my NFL nerd analyst cap on and let's start news. Robert Salah fired, which we get the great social media graphics where it just has like a picture of him and then fired in bold print below when he's gone here. Unexpected, I would say. Not that he hasn't had a long enough runway of mediocrity to warrant it. Of course, the reaction is going to be there's a nefarious plot behind the scenes of a cabal of Aaron Rodgers, just basically Aaron Rodgers. I guess I don't really need a cabal here. It's just Aaron Rodgers, first hug gate where he wouldn't hug him on the sidelines, and then now shortly thereafter being given the boot when the offense hasn't been performing that well this year. The defense has been pretty good for the last couple of years. What's your take on this? I don't think it's gonna have any effect on the Jets, probably. But if they're not doing well now, there's always like this new coach bump that people talk about. I think it's mostly just a regression. Like, you wouldn't be firing a coach if you weren't underperforming anyway, what your core talent is. What do you think, Hermsmeyer?
I agree with you. It's unexpected. I bet this is unexpected points, so it fits. And I think also you mentioned a cabal. I mean, I've seen the Lebanese flag arm patch trotted out as a reason, perhaps because Woody is Zionist. Maybe
I had heard that one.
Yes, and then you've got well, Woody used to be for Trump. He used to be an ambassador, and so he had lots of friends in London, and he brought them to the game, and he wanted his team to perform for his friends. And
didn't Robert Salah also have like relatives that like died on 9/11 or something like that? So we got some conflicting things going on here when it comes to the Middle East angle.
Yeah, I don't know exactly. It's funny, it's New York, so you have some of the craziest fans in the entire NFL, and also some sharp people who can go down rabbit holes. And so you get all these things trotted out. Why now? From my perspective, I think some people have brought up the point where you only fire a head coach mid-season, or this isn't even mid-season, still very early. If you think you have a team that can still win with whomever you have left on the staff, and apparently that guy is Ulbrich now. And Jeff.
I mean, that's not true. These guys get fired all the time at the end of the season where their teams just stink. But yeah, this early in the season, I would somewhat agree with.
Yeah, and now I think all of Ulbricht's agents cashing all his chits. He's asking people to retweet videos of him talking about being a good head coach. But I do believe, based on the owner's statement, that he thinks that Ulbrich can bring together the locker room a little bit better. And if it is the case that your CEO head coach, like, he's not calling defense, he's not calling offense, your CEO head coach is no longer leading effectively, right? He's lost the locker room. Say that's the normal way we phrase it. I don't see a real problem with changing him out for someone if they can handle those duties on top of what they were already doing. So if the DC can continue to call the defense effectively and take on all these other responsibilities, then I don't see a huge problem with it. People have been talking about Salah's defense being, one of the best in the league and all the rest. And I don't dispute it's been good, but I just feel like there's some added context that we're missing when you have a coach who had a garbage offense and teams that were often trailing. And so you're just not facing the best of the teams, the opponents you're playing. They're not coming after you. I mean, we talk about this all the time in analytics, how you don't want to give a team an incentive to pass on you, right? Well, that works in reverse. If the team is running on you more than your peers, your defensive coordinator peers, then your defense is going to, even if they're equally talented, you're going to look better in comparison, because there's going to be less yards run up against you, less points scored, because teams running the ball instead of passing.
Now, I just brought up a picture here for those of you watching of new interim head coach, defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich. You said it's pronounced that way. I don't know how it's pronounced, quite honestly.
Ulbrich, yeah.
That is a manly beard, I have to say. Like, look at the thickness, look at the density of that thing, like that. And as a beard enthusiast yourself, you would have to agree that it's. I mean, I'm feeling a rush of testosterone just looking at this picture.
I mean, former linebacker for the 49ers, it's what you'd expect, right? You're looking at a football guy. And I think, look, if Aaron Rodgers signed off on him, which clearly he had to, then I think you probably have a shot here in the midterm to turn this thing around.
Do you think
If
Aaron Rodgers
Rodgers,
said, "I want Nathaniel," and then they were like, we can't go that far. Sorry, we have
well,
like
I mean,
PR to worry about a little bit."
the Broncos just beat them, right? So I I don't know how you put Nathaniel in charge, who came from the Broncos, who just absolutely tore that thing down to the ground and then set fire to the ashes somehow. I don't know how you put him in charge. So I think if that was his suggestion, I think he lost that battle. And instead, Ulbricht was something he probably just said, "Yeah, I'm fine with that." This is
Now,
all
what
speculation. I have no idea.
one thing that I'll mention when we're talking about the situation, because everyone's going to share. I've seen mass sharing of defensive versus offensive statistics, whether it's since Salah had been there in 2021 or just this season, especially when we're talking about raw totals of points and yards, which don't look so hot for the Jets. I mean, my context on this will be so far through 5 weeks, they've faced pretty good defenses. Aaron Rodgers runs a very slow offense. One of my best gauges on offensive speed is when I'm rewatching a game on YouTube TV, whether I can click through 2 or even 3 times on skip forward between plays. You get a pretty maximum skip forward with the Jets between every play. There's not a lot, not a lot of stuff being hurried up in there. So, they like on a per play basis, adjusted for their strength of schedule, having faced the Vikings, the 49ers, the Titans, which are actually low key pretty good. The Broncos, as you mentioned, who I was being one of the best defense in the NFL, and the Patriots, who also aren't that bad defensively. It's just the Titans and the Patriots have no offense there. And if you think about the offenses for those teams, yeah, you got Brock Purdy and the 49ers. Outside of that, not so great offensively either. I know Sam Darnold, our guy, Sam Darnold. Fraudulent a little bit what's going on so far there. They haven't faced much offensively. So I guess that would be my contextual thing when you're going to, because people are going to want to make the biggest impact and say like, oh, you're firing the defensive coordinator who's doing well and not the offense that's doing poorly. I mean, things are probably going to flip a little bit going forward. I don't think defensively the team is as strong as people may think. And then offensively, just with strength of schedule starting to ease off a bit, I think they're going to get better offensively.
Yeah, I guess my take on the offense is that all the things that kind of Aaron Rodgers kind of leans on, all his little tricks, they really aren't as effective when he doesn't have a massive number of reps with his receivers so they're completely on the same page. So the kind of things he likes to do is throw it when the defender's back is turned. Like he had a near touchdown to Lazard in the end zone, and Lazard dropped it, but it was an incredibly difficult pass. In terms of the difficulty of the throw, but also hard to catch because Lazard turned his body at the last minute and the ball's really low. It's blocked by the defender. I mean, I get if you've put in, years and years of work with a receiver that you expect to make those passes. But like Rodgers wasn't there. He went to Egypt. Like he hasn't built that rapport with his number one wide receiver. And he hasn't been, let's imagine they do somehow get Davante Adams. Davante Adams comes into the building. He hasn't been with Davante for how many years? And you can see that even with a guy he's been with, but maybe hasn't had the reps with like Lazard, it still cannot work. So I just feel like people are expecting too much out of a diminished Rodgers at this point. That last interception of the game, it was a missed throw on his part. Like even if you're going to throw back shoulder in that situation, you don't throw it to the inside, right? You have to throw it to the outside, so that if it is a miss, it goes out of bounds safely. So he's not the same guy, and you shouldn't have expected that if you're a New York fan. You should not have expected that, and I think hanging your hopes on him suddenly becoming that guy again is a bit much.
Okay, so my like macro take here is we don't really know how much coaches matter or not. Salah, defensive coach, so not a play caller or anything like that. So a little bit harder to figure out necessarily. Again, the matteringness there. From a like public relations standpoint, and I'll cut him some slack because he had to deal with like Zach Wilson. I guess Sam Darnold when he first got there, or was it Zach Wilson who was drafted? I guess Zach Wilson was drafted immediately when he got there. Not ideal for anyone to have Wilson. But remember, there's like that whole controversy of like him saying what was the whole thing? Like he said he was benched, but he wasn't benched, and then he didn't know what was going on. I don't know. Aaron Rodgers was defending Zach Wilson at that point in time. So it like net, I don't think it makes a big difference. If I was going to fire someone, it probably would have been at least one, if not two off seasons ago. I would have just fired Joe Douglas because I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the things that he's done there. And ultimately, like those are the things that I can judge a little bit better. Sounds like he's going to survive. And who knows? When you have a regime that gets split like this, normally you have a little dissension within the regime. So there also could be an issue where maybe Douglas is a little bit tighter with Woody. So you got the Douglas Rodgers faction against the Salah faction, and that's how things worked out here.
Well, I mean, Douglas wasn't the one who made this firing decision, right? That can't be good. Yeah, I don't know that he survives. I don't think there's any good reason to get rid of him right now. I think that's something, you do probably early at the end of early in terms of the cycle at the end of the season. Yeah. But I don't think
I guess you don't see interim GMs that much.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, things can kind of keep themselves afloat until the off season, and then hopefully they won't have one of those ridiculous situations where they like go through the whole draft preparation with one guy and then like bring in another guy. But
no, you got to do it early in the cycle. Yeah.
Okay. So that's, peace out. Sure you'll find a defensive coordinator job somewhere. Bob will be okay, I think, on the other end. But I
think Jets, the 49er fans are already clamoring for him. And I think they wanted him fired in 2018, but hey, what's old is new again.
Yes, that's normally the way it works. All right, so let's concentrate on some more takeaways from the last week / talking points that are going around. You shared something on, actually, I should look it up here. You shared something on Twitter about scoring. So should we talk about the kind of the macro stuff that's going on? How we may be combating a little bit here the deep lying trends that have been going against the NFL when it comes to scoring. What have you found? What are you thinking? Is there anything reliable here? Is it noise? What's going on?
Oh, I mean, I don't think this is much more than just kind of like an interesting statistical nugget, but based on lots of previous research, we know that if you chuck it up there and you complete it about what's expected, right, that you're going to be adding value to your team's offense, right? And teams just haven't been doing that. They've been looking at the defensive looks that are being presented to them. People make a big deal about the too high shell, but I think that I think there's been a lot of confusion by quarterbacks early on, especially when they play teams like the Vikings, who are big on disguising what they're actually running, and so that confusion causes you to check down. You're not sure what you're seeing; it's muddy, and so you go and you throw these bubble screens when they're called, or you just check down your running back or your tight end. Actually, no one's been checking down the tight end, so it's mostly been line of scrimmage stuff when checkdowns occur. So anyway, long story short is a bunch of teams have not been challenging teams deep. And this is just a vibe of mine. When I watch the games, I kind of see that either receivers or the deep defenders aren't really playing the deep ball. They're actually cheating towards those intermediate routes because they're afraid of getting beat there. Actually, they think that's where the offense is going to end up. And they've been effective at defending those intermediate routes by and large. A lot of defenses has. And so the case I've been making early on is that, hey, chuck it up there, man, because I don't think they're ready for it. I think you'll complete more passes than you might expect. Well, in week 4, they chucked it up there. And these aren't rates. So just to be clear, I don't think rates tell the tale, because if you are more effective as an offense, you'll have more passing attempts, et cetera, et cetera. But in this case, they completed less than expected in week 4, 4% less than we would expect on those deep throws. And points per game were kind of flat compared to week 1. But then we had a spike this past week, and it was because, in part, a lot of those deep passes hit. And that's kind of the risk reward here that I'm pointing out. And I think hopefully teams continue to do this, just because I want to see an NFL offense that is actually peppering the middle of the field and the intermediate areas. I think I think that's where you want to live. That's the best balance between the value of the pass attempt and the payoff in terms of completion percentage. So that will open those up if they continue to try these deep shots.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the suggestions that I was thinking about for how offenses could evolve, pivot, however you want to frame it, based upon what defenses are doing, is that counterintuitively, as you get further down the field, the defensive realignment has less of an effect in a way. I mean, if you think about like a cover three, you actually have more players in that middle sideline sort of area that would be affecting something like a straight 9 route or something like that from someone from the outside than you do in a cover two in that sort of situation. But what you don't have is you don't have the underneath stuff, the crossers, those the things that they were using in line with play action to create a lot of yak and stuff over the middle of the field that gets taken out a bit more of this kind of like four shell around their 2 or 4 shell around there. I also think it's interesting, and this is very suspect and low sample size, but now we've seen a handful of these lateral passes, including on Monday Night Football, which I enjoyed. And in a way, they both throwing deep and throwing deep into the middle also. Like throwing towards the sideline, you have lower expected completion percentage, but also lower expected interception rates. So it's lower. It's kind of a lower risk, lower reward thing. So this is not quite what I'm talking about. It's more when you're closer to the middle of the field, or at least within, not right on the sideline. Both that and these lateral plays lean into what I'm thinking of, which is let's turn the dial up on there. Because like the reason you don't do the lateral play, you're scared to do the lateral play, is the downside is so big, right? The downside is so big if you don't catch the lateral and you fumble it and everything else that ends up happening. But in particular, when we saw this employed for the Chiefs, and again, what I'd like to see these employed down the field a lot more passing is let's not just, spam these sorts of plays or do them in any particular sort of situation. But when the Chiefs employed this play, they were in a somewhat, outlier type of situation where it was 3rd and 22 or 3rd and 21 or whichever one it was. My play-by-play doesn't agree with the broadcast on that. But in that circumstance, your expected points are so low to start off with that if you turn the ball over, it's not as much of a cost. Same thing throwing it down the field. So I do think these like strategically timed marginal increases in taking this more risk of reward, we should be looking for all different ways of doing this, not just these two ways, but those two things do go hand in hand at least.
Yeah, agree with that. And the other part of it is like, I know we're going to talk about this later, but so I'll pivot to this. There's a bunch of little things teams can do, right? If you don't have wide receivers like George Pickens taking every other play off, right? Not even running routes. Like we saw this play with JSN against who was Seattle playing? I'm already forgetting. The Giants.
Well, the Giants was last week, yeah.
Yeah, he ran a route down the field, and he took 2 defenders with him because he knew that Geno was running, but he actually continued to put his hand up, like mailboxed it, and he kept those 2 defenders with him all the way down the field while Geno trailed him as he continued to run a fake route. And I think you want to stack all these little edges that you can to encourage things like allowing your QB to make a scramble when he needs it, right? And I'll bring this up again when I think we're going to bring up the Bills and their decisions on the shadow of their goal line. You want to throw deep a little more than what you're already doing, because I think you're going to complete more of them. And then, trot out these laterals if, the down in the distance and the time remaining kind of argue for it. Because risk reward here is definitely in your favor.
Yeah, and the more you practice them, the more it can end up being a huge gain. I mean, there's somewhat of analogy. Sorry, I bring up probably soccer stuff too much because I've been focusing on it. But there's like this thing in soccer where they have this thing called set plays, which is basically a free kick, a corner kick, a throw in, other sorts of things where they don't really practice them enough but there's like a huge impact that you could potentially have in practicing these types of plays, because it's like a higher leverage sort of moment where you can actually, for the very few times, really translate coaching onto the field in a very specific way, as opposed to teaching these kind of fundamental ideas and then having it, you shake it up and you throw it out on the field and something ends up happening. In a way, when we're talking about these lateral types of plays and other things, I mean, whenever you're using it, it's going to be high leverage, right? And the nature of the play is also going to be high leverage. So, like, if you dedicate just a little bit more time to it, even if it's only a play that you're going to roll out once per game, because it's so much more high leverage, it could be a more valuable time spent than spending an additional however long on a fundamental that you're just going to run on every single running play or something like that. The marginal gain is not going to be as big there, and those plays are just not as impactful.
Well, I have a suggestion for where you might find time. Stop practicing kickoffs.
Just kick it deep. Where do we stand on that? Do you have those numbers, by the way? I'm dead. I already know I'm dead on this.
Yeah, you are dead. Yeah, I think I got this thing. No, I don't know what they are after this week, because if you notice, the Saints are one of the teams that sponsored the rule change, and they kicked it short a lot last night. So I don't know where we're at, but the Saints are one of the teams that are even keeping you like having the barest glimmer of a hope. So
okay, let me see if I can find this right now, because I have to say that. What have we learned after 4 weeks? So 29%. What about more recently? This reminds me of course, this will, the circumstances will change, depend upon the results. Yeah, it's still only 29. That's everyone has the first 4 weeks. Why doesn't anyone give me the first 5 weeks here? Whatever. It's not going to be that different from 30%. Which reminds me, guys, this is a little reminder. Like, we had our whole episode about how this is going to fail. Then I saw some stuff in preseason, and I got pushed off of that idea a little too much. And then now we were basically right. You stuck with it the whole time and did the right thing. I was influenced too much by evidence, and I should have just stuck with faulty evidence.
Whoa! You were influenced by preseason noise.
Okay, man, whatever. Faulty, noisy evidence, and so again, just stick with your takes. Don't get off them too early. So hat tip to Josh on that one. All right, let's talk coaches, because I thought there was an interesting thread on the Twitter bot that got a decent amount of play here. I see 55 retweets. 44 comments, including myself. I may have gone into this a little bit at one point, where when it's Robbie, just says Robbie on here. It says Greer NFL, so maybe that's his last name. Sorry, but apologies for he does an NFL Elo app, some good stuff here.
No, he's a sharp dude. He's a sharp dude.
So this is about Shanahan closing out games, as we've seen, and I've run some numbers on this. My favorite stat for Shanahan closing out games this year is that if you look at the percentage of plays in losses, okay, maybe I'm cutting this a little too many times here, but still, percentage of plays in losses that a team has run with a 90% win probability or higher before we even get to the fourth quarter, where you can have big swings. So you're like up big substantially early. 25% of the plays that have been run in these games that they've lost, they've had a 90% win probability. No one else has more than 5%, which is the Ravens. Only 4 teams have run any plays in the first 3 quarters with win probability over 90%. So the other than the Vikings game, basically, where they were down and never came back, their other 2 losses, they were up and in fantastic position to win and did not win. Now, those losses combined with 28-3, even though he wasn't officially the head coach at that point in time in Atlanta, in conjunction with some other failures in these types of situations over the years for Shanahan, having these great teams, not being able to get over the hump to get that Super Bowl victory after a couple appearances there, has leaned in even further based upon what's happened this year to the idea that Kyle Shanahan can't protect a lead. He's the problem in some sort of way, or at least a material part of the problem in some sort of way. And how Robbie displayed this was showing a win probability graph where it's basically your expected win probability on the bottom and then your actual win percentage on the top. And what it shows you is, depending upon the game state that you're in, so if you're behind, so you have a low win probability, or if you're ahead, you have a high win probability, what actually ends up happening in these games. And for Kyle Shanahan, for the games there, is that if he's in this, 25 to 50% range of win probability, so losing at that point in time, not trailing by a ton, but losing that point in time, his teams are winning more often than you'd expect. But then the reverse, and this is what we're concentrating on here, is if you have a lead, he's not winning as much as you would expect over his career. And whether or not this is a real thing, a bunch of other coaching charts he brought in here, Belichick, Andy Reid, Mike Tomlin, they all look pretty good across the board there. Tony Dungy, Sean Payton looks pretty good across the board. Pete Carroll, Sean McVay, Mike Shanahan, maybe it's just it's a curse. It's been passed down over the generations. It's kind of similar to Kyle Shanahan in this regard. What do you think about this thread? What do you think about the idea that Shanahan has some sort of effect in these situations in not being able to close out games where they have a lead?
I mean, I think it's fair. I think that, saying it's all the coaches also, going, that's a bridge too far. But I think it's fair to look at it from the coach's lens, and kind of make some inferences as how much you want to attribute what you're seeing in that data to the coach himself, and what it is, team level, quarterback, whatever you might want to say is the most relevant factor. But I think there has to be something to it with Shanahan. When I looked at it back in 2022, I think for 538, I looked at Shanahan's scripted plays and how when he goes off script, things kind of fall apart. At least they were early that season. And I found that they were falling apart to an extent that could not be explained by simple variance and luck, that there was some signal to it. So I'm open to the idea that Shanahan is either being too risk loving late in the game, trying to maximize his efficiency, perhaps his production at the expense of maximizing win probability. I think that is perhaps a fault you could lay at his feet. But I think that's it. It's difficult for us in the moment when we're watching to criticize a play that gains some yards and then get up, and then blame it. And then it's easy to blame it on the quarterback when the pass play goes bad and he throws an interception in the Super Bowl or something. But I think the part that we kind of discount and don't pay as much attention to are the decision making. Is the decision making that goes into some of those late game situations, and he's notoriously bad at that stuff.
So, what's interesting about this, and I assume this is where the idea came from, because I had done some of these sorts of graphs in the past, and I'll bring up the originator here, which was work that had been done by Benjamin Morris, formerly of 538, Skeptical Sports on Twitter, for anyone who wants to follow him. So I had replicated some of this stuff. So again, doing these actual win percentage versus expected win percentage at any point in time, aggregating all that data, drawing a diagonal line that would show you what you would expect, and then plotting different quarterbacks against it. And he had this whole thing about gunslingers. He loved the term gunslinger and the different types of quarterbacks there. And when he did this for quarterbacks, it showed Aaron Rodgers, interestingly, with not performing that well when from behind, which is something I think he probably has been a little bit too conservative. I did a piece on this in PFF, if you guys want to look it up, a few years back after Rodgers got knocked out, where, it really does show that there's a bunch of different metrics if you looked at when he was trailing from a lower win probability standpoint, where quarterbacks like Peyton Manning or Tom Brady, even Drew Brees, a bunch of different stats would go up, like ADOT and passes into the middle of the field and other things that would be more risk-taking sorts of plays, where he did not go up commensurate to how other players had done. So there's something there. It showed, the perfect curve for Peyton Manning. So that kind of is to my opinion, that's the Tony Dungy curve, is the Peyton Manning curve. A lot of these coaches are, and the same thing, Tom Brady curve is the Bill Belichick curve to a degree. A lot of these are a lot of the coaching curves are quarterback curves disguised as coaching curves. But
Sure.
what was interesting to me is when I look at the quarterbacks who have a similar sort of composition as the Shanahan curve. Stafford is someone who shows up on here. Now, this is circa 2014, so this is a while ago, where he's pretty good at comebacks, not good at holding leads. Okay, pretty bad defense with the Lions, so that's probably part of it. But there might be something to how he plays. And the other guy is Tony Romo, really, really good at comebacks, not so good at holding leads. And I think Romo, for as much as I love him, he was infamous for like throwing the game-killing interception at the end, where he's really trying to win these games in certain circumstances, and maybe would make this comeback. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. But I wonder how much of this again is just like a quarterback stat, and how much the calibration, the proper calibration, which comes down to also when we're talking about down and distance and how much risk to take and your expected points and things like that, the proper calibration of the quarterback versus the coach. And specifically with Shanahan, I don't think it's a stretch to say Jimmy Garoppolo and Brock Purdy, maybe they're a little too willing to try and stick it in there. That didn't sound great, but you know what I mean. To try to throw it in the middle of the field and get a potential interception in these game states where they should be dialing down the risk a bit more than they are.
Brock Purdy, the gunslinger. That's your take?
He is tight window throws. Have you not seen the tight window? He really is this year. He's chucking it up there quite a bit, I would say. I mean, the thing is, if you look at their stats this year, I was looking again, when they were over 90% win probability in these first three quarters, like what happens after that? Like what's explaining these losses? The offense goes down to like negative 0.3 EPA per play, which is, just disastrously awful. Deshaun Watson's like, hey, I'm not that bad. He's looking at that type of number and thinking that sort of thing. And the defense has gotten a little bit worse, but the offense has really imploded this year, mostly because of turnovers. Now, they've had a couple of fumbles, which is not, which has been highly costly and not the fault of Brock Purdy. But at the same point in time, his turnovers have been part of the reason where, you would hope that he would be dialing that down a little bit.
I guess this early season, you might make the case that, his attitude towards tight window throws has changed. Or you might make the argument that when they have full strength on offense, that he doesn't have to make tight window throws and that they scheme open the first read. And so he hasn't needed to be a gunslinger in the past. But I just think that it's heterogeneous. It's all across the board for the quarterbacks and the situations. The one thing that is a constant with Mike Shanahan or Kyle Shanahan's teams is Kyle Shanahan himself. So I think there's something to this idea that he isn't optimal in late game situations or in high leverage win probability situations. So I'm buying it. I'm buying that there is some something you can attribute to the Shanahan.
I mean, I'm just saying, like, for everything we know about quarterback stats, coaching stats, the effect of things, sure, everything's a combination, right? Like, everything's a combination of a bunch of different things. But if we could point to any single person that you can apply more of the effect than anyone else, it would be the quarterback, certainly over the coach, that we could figure out. So I guess that's why I lean towards this being a quarterback stat versus a coaching stat. I mean, what's interesting, and maybe this is not super convincing, I probably want to wait this to figure out, like, based upon game state and situation, this and that. But for a 49ers team that was, winning a ton last year, if you look at turnover worthy play rate, poor Desmond Ridder, RIP, Desmond Ridder, for guys who had at least 400 dropbacks last year, Brock Purdy has the 11th highest number. So you look at the rest of these guys on here, I mean, the teams are not great, right? So for a team that was up a lot, he had a pretty high turnover worthy play rate last year. And if you go to this year, well, you got to get rid of these custom dropbacks. Let's do 50% of 225. If you go to this year, where is good old Purds?
24.
Okay, so yeah, he's not so high this year. actually. Only 2.1%. Only 4 turnover-worthy plays. Interesting. So maybe he's actually has a little bit of dose of bad luck since he has 4 turnover-worthy plays and 4 interceptions, where normally there are more turnover-worthy plays versus interceptions. I mean, I would say generally, like, I'm not as negative on the 49ers. I still have them as being potentially, the best team in the NFL, close-ish. Their defense has been probably worse in some ways than their offense has been so far this year. But it's an interesting thing, at least to think about when it comes to Shanahan lore. Like, how would you explore this if we wanted to put this onto the coach? You mentioned a couple of theories. I think that's the only way really to do it, right? Is to have a hypothesis, test it, see if it has anything that you might be able to get into, see if there's any sort of transference to other coaches in a similar way, and then continue to iterate on that to try to figure out if there's anything to it.
Yeah, I think looking at scripted plays helps. I know our buddy Eric Eager used that as
And
one
that
of his.
makes sense, right? That aligns with the timing issue where you could get to a high win probability really early in these games. People sometimes don't have an appreciation for like how high the win probability can be when you're up a score or two, even in the second quarter. So you could get there quickly, mostly influenced by the script, and then the flip of the script in the second half.
Right. And I think we talked about on a previous episode the way that teams actually it was a coach talking about what happens at the half and how adjustments are made. It's, did the team do what you expect? If they did, you react to that. And then if you do effectively react to it, they'll just go back to what they've been, right? That all along. And maybe when teams react to Shanahan, he becomes what he has been all along, and he becomes fairly predictable in the way he does what he does. And maybe that's a part of this equation of him not being as effective late when the game is on the line. That kind of cuts against the narrative, though, that he's so unpredictable in the way he calls his plays and that every play looks the same, whether it's run or pass. But maybe he has his favorite things. Maybe he has tendencies when things get tough. And maybe this is something I heard last night. Andy Reid, he was talking about his failures in the red zone. Or the team's failures, and he kind of put some of it on him. He's like, I got to call a play they can execute, right? And maybe there's something to that as well with Shanahan.
Now, what's interesting about Shanahan is generally you'd put it in the bucket of running at a higher than expected rate, yet when he's caught flack for these comebacks, it's almost invariably about the fact that he didn't run enough. Now, there's a big bias in that because if a team comes back, as I was saying, by these numbers, these 49ers numbers where their offensive efficiency is trash, it's turnover related. Turnovers happen more often. You're more likely to get a cluster of turnovers passing the ball than you are rushing the ball, or a cluster of incompletions or negative plays where you're not grinding out the clock and other things. Because, infamously not running the ball, losing the 28-3 at the end, where he definitely should have run the ball. I don't want to relitigate that whole thing, even though he says, que sera, or whatever on the whole thing. Yeah, I mean, so that was a problem. And in both Super Bowls, there were complaints in the second half about too much passing, where I don't think that was actually an issue. I think it was just they were unsuccessful passing. When you're unsuccessful passing on first down, you're kind of forced to pass more often because you're not extending drives and getting more opportunities to run. What do you think about that dynamic? Could there be an issue where, maybe he isn't leaning into his core competency of the run, which they're doing earlier in these games as part of this script as much in the second half?
That'd be interesting. I tend to discount that it's as simple as run pass, but it certainly could be the case that, again, he's pushing edges late with high win probabilities when he should be maximizing the win probability, not EPA, the way we would talk about it. He's out there trying to be efficient, right? Constantly. And instead, maybe he needs to dial that back and just, kind of be a good steward of that high win probability that he has.
And talking about coaches here, I guess we got to talk. Let's talk about McDermott. Someone who's, I don't know, how hot is his seat, do you think, right now?
Well, I think he was one of on the short list to get the boot first, and Salah came in and just spiked the football on everyone. So I think whoever bet on Salah's cashed a pretty large ticket.
Yeah, he wasn't even on some of those graphics for who's going to get who's going to end up getting fired. But so the big thing here, and there's crime stat going on here when it came to. I'll talk about this a little bit. I don't want to focus on it too much because it's
But
just.
I just want to set
Okay,
this
go ahead.
here. People have been just dunking on him for those pass plays, right? And I
Okay,
can
well,
argue.
let's set it up a little bit here. So we're talking about
Okay,
the end of the game. They get the ball back with 30-something seconds. They're on their own 4-yard line or something like that. And they pass the ball 3 straight times, punt it back to the Texans, who end up is tied 2020 to kick the field goal and win the game. Go ahead.
yeah. So the critique is they left them with all their timeouts, right? And they took no time off the clock. My response would simply be, well, I mean, if you don't make a first down, you don't get out from the shadow of your end zone. Does it really matter if they even have a timeout? If you punt to them and they get it where they got it, it's literally one completion or even a run, I think is all it took. And then a spike of the football and you kick the same long field goal. So I'm not sure any amount of like 1 or 2 yard runs and making and forcing them to use up their timeouts is going to really change the outcome that much. I think the idea was sound that we need to get a first down, right? We need to move the ball. And I guess what I would say is that I would have maybe wanted to rely a little bit more on Josh Allen's legs and the scramble there. And that's why I kind of brought up JSN and him throwing up the mailbox and taking 2 defenders out of the play. Something like that. Now, to be fair, they probably were not playing man. This was going to be a very zone-heavy call against the team in the shadow of their own goal line. But at the same time, I mean, like, call something where you still keep his legs in play, because that's the out you want in those situations. If everyone's covered, you have something set up where you run routes that kind of take some of those defenders out of the area where Josh might be able to pick up 3-4 yards instead of just chucking it down the field and getting those incompletions.
Now, okay, so here's all the different parameters here. First of all, the ESPN had this article. ESPN Research was juking the stats a little bit here, because they had, over the last 45 years, if a team is tied or leading in the final minute of the game inside their own 5-yard line, they're the first team ever to throw 3 straight passes. Now, they mentioned over 45 years here. I don't know if I have the 45-year sample, but they also hinted at a sample since the year 2000. They said there were 83 different circumstances where a team had been in the situation. I only found like 70, but I don't know. I might not have my filters correct on here. And they were the only team to pass it 3 straight times. I mean, the first off thing is, like, the or leading is doing a lot of work in this circumstance. Like, yeah, if you're not leading, you're much more motivated to. I mean, if you're leading, you're much more motivated to run out the clock, obviously, and not give the ball back to your opponent, because you win if the opponent doesn't score, as opposed to, hey, you might actually want to try and score yourself in this situation. And we've seen teams able to do that to some degree. I think it was more than half of the instances, around 65-70% of the instances that I found, were just teams kneeling it out. So they were in situations where their opponent didn't have the ability to stop the clock all 3 times. So again, not really comparable. So anyway, so stat crime going on here, big time. But as you mentioned, like, if we want to be results focused, completely results focused, and we play back the scenario as it unfolded the same exact way, like, what if they ran the ball 3 times, did it, or they kneeled it 3 times, whatever they did, they're at the 3-yard line. So they want to get some yardage, right? To get out from the shadow of their own end zone. They do that. They run it 3 times, or they kneel it 3 times, or whatever. I guess you couldn't really kneel it. You don't have enough room. You got to run it at least once. The Texans call all their timeouts, or they do it twice, and the Texans call 2 of their timeouts, because the Texans only use 1 timeout. They went into they ended the game with 2 timeouts unused. So at maximum, they only needed 1 timeout. They may not have even needed 1 timeout if they threw a passing play to gain a little bit of yards versus a running play. So if they would have just sat on the ball, been stuck inside their own 5, punted it off, and the Texans would have run a 5-yard out and then kicked a 60-yard field goal, people would be yelling at McDermott for being chicken shit and not taking enough risk in that situation and allowing the Texans to just win the game. So I think he was a little bit in a it just played out poorly, and damned if you do, damned if you don't type of situation to some degree here.
Yeah, it was a tough spot. And it's one of those things where I think, if we're going to be fair analysts and all that stuff, like let's not dog on the guys when it's close. Let the coach have his say. That's why he's the damn coach. And in this case, I probably, like, personally, like I said, I would like to have some routes that open up a lane for Josh Allen if he sees it, and so he can scramble. I would have run the ball at least once just to take one of those timeouts off the board. But I mean, whatever.
Well, and get
Whatever.
yourself out a little bit. Give yourself a little bit more room to punt also, being at your
Yeah.
own 3-yard line. I think it is important.
Yeah. I mean, there's room to criticize, but I just think that this was not a dunk on the coach situation, in my opinion.
You know what? McDermott's interesting to me because I feel like his persona is not exactly like ingratiating when it comes to media or fans or whatever. And then you have the double whammy where, again, mostly because of poor luck and circumstance, they've underperformed what you would have hoped they would have done with the quality of the team that they have, even though I think he's been a pretty good another defensive coach, right? I think he's been pretty good there, because they've been in the AFC and Patrick Mahomes is, not only great, they rolled the dice and have been, getting 7 every single time to win some of these games going forward. So because of that, he doesn't have a lot of slack. No one's cutting him any slack when these sorts of things happen because he hasn't built up that goodwill from the fact that people kind of look at him as an underperformer as a head coach versus what their reasonable expectations would have been during this peak Josh Allen era, which is now going on the 4th year without anything to show for it when it comes to Super Bowl appearances.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think it's fair. Like, I mean, he has underperformed. Well, his team has. Josh Allen led team has. But again, as you mentioned, yeah, you're going up against Patrick Mahomes, perhaps the best quarterback ever to trot out there. So I'm no one's crying for him, but I think that's the point we need to underline. They got lucky on a quarterback that was a low probability to hit, turned out to be elite. They traded for a pretty good wide receiver, which, obviously, if they had to use that pick on Justin Jefferson, maybe we'd be having a different discussion right now. So I think there's, hindsight kind of analysis of that team. They did all right, but he's certainly not a coach that you would put up there in my opinion, at the elite. And so he's open to criticism, and people will take their shots.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things too, and I think this comes into the Shanahan discussion where when I was going back and forth with Robbie about, is it coaches, is it quarterbacks, how do we think about it? He was saying, well, this aligns really well with the narrative, and like coaches, win losses are the narrative for coaches, right? Like, what else is there basically for coaches? We can't say like, oh, look how great this coach played, but this coach coached, but his team lost. That doesn't really happen that much. It is the only objective measurement that at least overwhelms a lot of these other things. Even if we look at decision points and we look at scripts and we look at other things, where we're just kind of scratching the surface on what coaches are actually doing. So I think like you are your record, right? That whole saying, you are your record. Coaches should be saying that because it's true for them more than it is for any other player on the field.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm big on the idea that you want your stats to pass some face validity test. This idea that it makes sense to someone who's a domain expert, right? That should definitely be true, but that's not the be all end all. I mean, like, you still want your stats to be insightful, and you don't want to begin and end with whether or not it confirms your priors.
It's good on Twitter though, if it confirms your priors. Okay. What should we talk here? One thing I want to mention about Belichick. Did you see this McAfee segment or no?
Yeah.
It's pretty long, so I don't want to get into the whole thing on here, but I'm gonna play some of it, and then I want to have a discussion about kind of like, at least in my opinion, how you respond to these sorts of things. And anyway, whatever. I don't want to give too much of an intro here. Let's which one am I sharing here? I'm sharing the wrong one. let's bring this one up and see what Bill has to say here, where Pat sets him up to. Pat's trying to get him to dunk on the nerds.
He loves to do that.
He would love to do that. So Pat's really trying his hardest to get him to dunk on the nerds. So I'll give Bill some credit for not taking the bait at least a little bit on this.
Let's talk about your situational awareness, because that is like a massive piece of the New England Patriots' success. They never have critical errors in the biggest moments. And then people say, well, that's because Bill Belichick harps on situational football in meetings more than anybody else. With the arrival of...
Well, I mean, let me say one thing. Talk about results bias. Yeah, I mean, the teams that win all the time don't have critical errors because, how are you going to have a critical error and win at the same time? But anyway, let me.
I know. I love a tautology, a good tautology.
And statistics and everything that comes out, like, well, if you go for it here on this particular play with 2 minutes left, you have a 71.4% chance of winning. What the hell does that mean? Does that mean in the past 71.4% of the people have gone on to win? What happened?
Can we pause for a second? I'm having a tough
in that
time.
particular point. Are we?
Sorry, go ahead.
I'm having a tough time taking Pat seriously without a sleeveless shirt on. So I'm trying to get past that.
Yeah, you can still he's still got a tight enough shirt, so it's okay.
Not going to chat about their livelihoods and the outcomes of football. How much have you changed your view on situational football? And why do you think everybody describes you as the person who kind of harped on it the most in the history of football?
Well, I think the analytics conversation is a very interesting one, and certainly I've had a lot of them in my coaching career. The issue is really for analytics people is they want data, right? And so they look at all the 4th and 1 or whatever the situation is. It's called 4th and 1. They look at all the 4th and 1 situations, and they have thousands and thousands of plays, and then they make decisions based on that. Here's the analytics. This is what it tells you based on what yard line it is, and whether it's on the 4th and 1 on the 1 or 4th and 1 on a plus side of the 50, minus side of the 50, whatever it happens to be. But there's all these data points. And the problem I always had with that is it isn't our team, and we don't know who the opponent was. It's just random teams. So if you have a good offense against a bad defense, going for it on 4th and 1 makes sense. If you had a bad offense against a good defense, I don't know if 4th and 1 makes sense. And so I always try to take into consideration the matchup of the game and how good I felt about the play we were calling in that situation. As an example, on 4th and 1, there's a lot of other analytical situations too, but that would be one. So,
okay, so that was kind of the main point that people were talking about.
Well, keep going, because he says something interesting at the end here.
Okay, hold on. Let me.
I think there's a balance. I think certainly once you get into the game, you have a much better feel for how it's going. Can you run the ball? Can you block them? Can you protect? Can you throw it? And those decisions, I think, are a little bit more straightforward. It doesn't mean they're going to work out, but I think you have more confidence in how the matchup's going to go as it's later on in the game. I think that 4th and 1 in the first quarter on the first possession is maybe a little bit of an unknown, and sometimes you think that they're going to be in one particular defense, and if they're not, then you could be in trouble. So, but the good thing about that, whenever I did that with Brady, he always knew he had the green light that, hey, if you walk up there, Tom, and think that we don't have a good play here, or you don't like the way this looks, then take a timeout, or if we don't have a timeout, take a delay game penalty. The last thing I want to do, if we don't have any timeouts, last thing I want to do is get stopped on 4th and 1 anywhere. So if you don't like the way it looks, then call it off. And he was very good at that. He was great at it, not good at it. He was great at it. And so I think when you do that, if you have a lot of confidence in your quarterback and the execution of the play, then that's really where you want to be the most aggressive.
Let's talk.
Okay. All right. Well, what's your response to this? And then I'm going to go over some of the responses I saw and why I don't necessarily agree with the technique or the ideas of other responses. Go ahead.
Sure. No, so the first part, Coach is absolutely right about the details of the game, whether you're left tackle and your left guard or blocking effectively. And so whether or not you have any faith in the play going off to the left, that is the coach's domain. That is where they have to make those decisions. And so, yeah, that's going to influence, the base rate. But start with the base rate, right? It's not random teams. It's all the teams. It's all the teams over a large period of time. It gives you a very good sense of what the good, bad, the average teams, all of that is in there. So it gives you a good sense of what your success rate might be. And then you adjust up or down from there based on the situation as you see it. What I thought was really interesting, though, was that Bill is talking about how he never, ever wants to lose a 4th and 1. I mean, if that is the test, then you don't get it, man. I mean, there are times when the entire point of the win probability is that if you do lose, you still might be in a relatively good situation, right? If you don't convert, there are times when you're still fine with the outcome, right? And to have that kind of, and that's why I kind of think maybe he was just overstating his opinion. I think he probably understands that those situations exist. But if he isn't, that's a huge leak in his way of thinking about the game.
Yeah. So my reaction to this, first of all, it's like a reaction to a reaction, which is maybe like too much navel gazing sort of thing here when it comes to analytics people. But I saw at least a few people who would say, and they love to do this when it comes to a coach will say, or, a Lombardi or someone that people love to analytics people love to yell at, will say, oh, well, it doesn't account for X. And then we'll be like, aha, no, it does account for who you are and who the opponent is. We can build that into our models, like we just wipe our hands there. We've won our argument. And now you must follow our models 100% of the time. I mean, I just think that's a little bit of a false idea. I think if you come to Bill Belichick with your black box model and you say, oh, listen, I looked at defensive strength based upon all of these random variables and who they've played and the strength of their opponents and, teams that have been similar in the past and blah, blah, blah. And it came together. Like, you're just never going to get over that objection because they're always going to come back and say, yeah, but I have a better idea than what that I still don't trust it. Just because you tell me you put team strength and opponent strength into this model, they're not just going to say, okay, I'm fine with this opaque model, which is built in this thing that I'm asking for. Like, that's not really the important point. You're never going to say, you don't believe in base rates and models generally, but I've built this contextually perfect model and now you're going to believe in it. Like, it just doesn't work. They're never going to be able to get over the hump in believing that the context to their degree is there. And the reason is they overvalue context, period. And I think that's kind of the big point for me is that he even hints at it a couple of times in this quote. One, talking about the opponents and who you are and this and that. The other talking about, well, it's a little bit more of an unknown in the first quarter when you're going for it, but it's less of an unknown later on in the game. No. That's not really how it works. Like your base rates you're grounded by those, first quarter or fourth quarter quite a bit. And there might be a little bit of a difference when we're talking about it, but guess what? The defense can adjust. Like, the other team can adjust too, based upon looks that you're seeing and other things that are happening. So I just think generally, I don't know how you necessarily have this breakthrough. I think the feedback that coaches have gotten from seeing the evidence and seeing teams go for it and seeing teams be successful has been the most important thing in getting them to respect what the models are telling them and the base rates are telling them. But like, if you just go to a Belichick or some coach of the world and you say, like, how often are the Chiefs, who've had a really great offensive game in the fourth quarter, going to convert it 4th and 1 versus the Raiders, who've had a poor offensive game, going to convert a 4th and 1? They're going to give wildly different answers for those two different teams. And that's just not going to comport with what the evidence tells us, that everyone, it's a much more narrow range for what our expectations can be. And it's really, that will be the breakthrough. And then once you have that breakthrough, then, it's more easier to accept that we're going to tweak these models a bit with context and other things that end up happening.
Yeah, I don't think there's any getting away from the distrust of black box models. Cade Massey did a study on this, basically called it algorithm aversion. People will distrust a model the instant it's wrong, unless it's perfect. They will never trust it. And the solution he found was to let them fiddle with the inputs so that they get different outputs. And so, yeah, allowing humans to actually have a say in the decision-making process, but limiting, right, the amount they can make that decision, they can change that decision, is the key. You want to keep them focused on, or in a narrow range around, that base rate. Anyway, so I think that your point's well taken. I think we've made great strides. I think, as we talked about on a previous episode, I think one of the reasons why we've been able to make strides on 4th down calls is because it aligns with this idea of being an aggressive macho football guy, which is which is something that they can, it's always been, like I said, I always bring this up, but it's always so weird to me that you want to trust your defense, but you won't trust your offensive line. Like, that's crazy to me. So just that switch, I think, has been fairly easy to kind of convince coaches to make. Is like, no, I'll just switch my rhetoric a little bit. I can still be a dude. I can still inspire the team. We're just going to put the emphasis on the offense.
What I think is interesting, I've heard Belichick's name floated as far as the Jets are concerned, which would be knowing historically what ended up happening there with him. The famous what was it, a napkin or something that he's like, I resign. Like, basically, it took off to go coach the Patriots instead afterwards in the history there. Now, I don't want to harp on this too much, but we've talked about how these defensive coordinators have capitulated and it basically said, let's stop these explosive plays and everything else that's going on. Maybe it's just default former coach on TV talk sort of thing. But I'll at least note that when Belichick was on the Manning cast for the Monday night game, before both drives, they put a graphic up with 4 points, like keys to defensive success for the two different teams. For the Saints, key number 1 was stop the run. For the Chiefs, key number 1 was a variation of stop the run. It was like stop the zone run or something like that. But it was basically stop the run. And then like key number 3 was stop explosive plays, passing plays, or something like that. Like, I think I'd reorder those a little bit if I was personally doing that sort of thing. Like, is it possible that Belichick, even in this short amount of time, as an old dude, we've seen, Pete Carroll get run out of town. As an old guy, if he did come back, is it possible that the game is like passed him by? Does he not have that capitulation mental shift to actually fit in with what's going on in today's NFL defenses?
No, I think for him, though, it's always so context dependent. Like, everyone trots out the example in the Super Bowl, let the Bills run. We don't want to deal with the passing game. Right. So I think that he can get there, but it's very team and situation dependent.
Yeah. And I think, again, when everyone yelled at me for saying that Brady and his run worship was like, it's almost like religious doctrine in a way. It's like, okay, I have to put stop the run up top because we have to do that. Like, that's, we have to say, Jesus is the Lord or whatever. Like, that's the first thing that we talk about. And then we'll get into the actual, like, how do you comport yourself in order to follow those different things. Stop the run is the Jesus basically of NFL play. And we need to throw that up top, even if we're going to actually approach these different matchups a little bit differently. All right. We've gone for about an hour and 7 minutes. I think we can wrap it up here. Is there anything else that you want to talk about? Do you have some air yard targets that you want to talk about?
No targets to share, but we did have another hit on $1 million winner. So that's 4 weeks in a row. A little different this time. It was a small field, one of the expensive milli contests on DraftKings. So this is a little more niche win, but it just shows that the stuff works in small and large field high stakes contests. So yeah, check it out on airyards.substack.com. Zay Flowers was the big winner last week. And I'll have up another 8 or so guys for your perusal on Thursday or Friday.
Yeah, and while it may not have hit the big bomb payout when it comes to the larger field ones, clearly, if it's a successful play in a smaller field, it's a successful play in a larger field too, just not to the degree as you have the exponentially growing prize packages that come out near the top. All right. Follow Josh on Twitter at Frisco Josh. Go to airyards.com. Check out everything else he has available there. Unexpected points. I guess I didn't even, it's the podcast. So like, what the hell do I have to plug for? But anyway, go on all that sort of stuff. I'll have the power rankings out today, the adjusted quarterback efficiency stuff out tomorrow, quarterback rankings, and then all of the different adjusted scores and advanced reviews going forward. Thanks so much for everyone for tuning in. Thanks for Josh for joining me again. And I'll be talking at you guys next time. Thanks.